Hi and welcome to this 3D experience tutorial for a chess set. My chess pieces were modelled entirely within the 3D Sculptor app Xshape. Xshape uses subdivision modelling. You start with a 3D shape primitive and use push and pull techniques with a robot to model. For this tutorial I'll show you how I modelled the pawn, rook and knight chess pieces. Now before I start, Xshape is a very freeform application, so our models won't match up exactly. You can follow my steps as closely as you can, but you're also free to create your own designs. Or you can take any tips away and create your own set based on the features I show you. I'll be focusing on the use of the crease tool, subdivision extrude, and inserting loops. To begin, I'm starting a new component within the Xshape app. I'm going to name my file Pawn Chess Piece. Once the design window opens, I can create some sketches as size guides for my chess piece. These will just be guides to design to, so that I don't have out of scale pieces and the set comes together more cohesively. So selecting the XY plane, select the sketch icon and use the circle from the sketch tools here to draw a 27mm circle from the centre axis and then close the sketch. Then sketch onto the YZ plane and use the line from the axis to sketch a 45mm vertical line. You will see a V icon to know that the line is vertical. Closing the sketch, these guides will outline the width and height of the chess piece. The next step is to choose a primitive to start modelling. You'll find these shapes under the Subdivision tab. Use the drop down to see the shape options here. I'm using the cylinder for all my pieces, and I'm dropping it onto the axis here. It should highlight bright blue like this. Once dropped in, I can edit the number of loops or control loops of the shape. So I'm editing the horizontal loops to 7 and the vertical loops to 10, then check the tick. Sometimes I leave the shape as it is and add loops when needed, but I already know the approximate number of loops needed to design my chess pieces. Viewing from the front, I'm going to start by selecting this edge. Holding Shift, I'm selecting the further edge of the next edge here to select the whole loop around the shape. I can then use the Quick Features toolbar here to crease the edge to become straight along the base of the shape. Then I'm just dragging over and selecting the points of the two bottom rows and pulling them down using the arrow heads of the robot. Before I move on to the design of the pawn, I'm going to scale down the shape to fit the sketch guides. Selecting the whole shape, I'm using the X and Y dots of the robot, holding Shift to select both, drag to pull the cylinder up to the edge of the circle sketch. This doesn't have to be perfect. Then I'm going to drag some of the rows of the shape down to try and get the height of the pawn up to the top point of my guide sketch. I can now focus on the design. Starting at the base, I'm scaling the bottom rows out to create almost a rounded taper like this. Remember to select both dots on the robot to scale proportionally. You may see me selecting points for scaling and then view from the front. This is just to see the profiles more clearly. I'm creating a rounder profile for the top of the pawn piece. With the rough shape in place, I can view from the side profile and use this centre face and the subdivision extrude feature here. You'll see in the preview this extrudes outwards, but to create a hole through the shape you need to select a face on the opposite side like this. The preview will change to a hole. Apply it with the tick. Going back to my front view, I'm going to thin out the top part of the shape, selecting the top half of the piece like this, and scaling the shape one way. Now it's just a case of me fine-tuning the shape until I'm happy. If I click on the save icon here, the shape will close and knit itself into a solid body. I like to export my models using the export option under Save. to be able to bring the part into SolidWorks and create animations and renders that you'll see in this tutorial. If you want to do this too, and you're using a desktop version of SolidWorks, just change the destination to File on Disk and change the file type to Step AP214 and save the file where you want it. Now I can move on to the Rook chess piece. Instead of starting a new part from scratch, I'm going to use Save As and change the name to Rook chess piece. Now I can go back into the initial guide sketches to amend them for this chess piece. For the circle sketch, this needs to be edited to 30mm, just a little wider than the pawn piece. Then edit the height of the line sketch to 50mm, which is 5mm taller than the pawn. With those in place, I can go back into the subdivision surface for editing. I'm going to start by dragging the shape to be the height of my guide. Then scaling up the base to match the circle base guide. Then I'm scaling down the hole in the piece using the 2 robot dots. Now I need to add some more loops to the shape to give myself more controls. Under the Subdivision tab, select the Insert Loops icon here and select this edge. A preview of the loop will appear. I only need one, so I can check the tick to apply the loop. I need to bring these rows up higher to create the upper part of the rook, and then scale down the overall width of the piece across these 2 rows. Here I'm tweaking the shape to tighten the corner of the piece. I'm also dragging this row down to make space to add a second loop here. Editing these few rows around the top of the rook, I need to make space for another new loop here. Using this loop, I'm scaling it up to create straighter sides for the rook. Looking at the shape from the front plane, I'm scaling up the top half of the rook to give it a rounder top half like a castle tower. I need to scale these 2 rows separately to be a similar width to the top of the rook. Then I need to move the hole up to be more centre. Before I move on, I'm going to show you a feature where you can realign points. Selecting the loop here, you can use Line Align. I'm repeating the process for these points across this row. And then the top row here. Next, I'm scaling down the top points of the rook this way, and then scaling the hole back to be circular, then scaling it down smaller again. I need to square off the top row of the rook with this loop, and then the same for this loop to keep the profile smooth. Viewing from the top, I need to make the top 5 rows circular again by scaling the points this way. Sometimes you need to isolate certain rows individually. To make the design look more like a rook, I'm going to add some extrusions to the top of the shape. Move the piece to view from the top like this, and select this face of the shape and the extrude icon. Then select every other face segment until you have 5 extrusions and check the tick. The shape is now taller than our guides, so I need to shorten the extrusions a little and scale them inwards while I have them selected. Then I can drag some rows down to shorten the rook until it's at the right height. Now I'm just tweaking the shape of the piece. Narrowing the middle part. And again, scaling down the top of the ruck further. And tightening the height of this top part. Once I'm happy with the shape of the ruck, I'm going to sharpen the top edges of the extruded faces a little. Selecting one of the faces and the crease feature here, I can edit how soft or sharp the edge is. So I'm going to select the 4 other faces and edit the crease to 60 so that they aren't as rounded as before. I need to shorten them a little to be in line with the guide height, and with that done, I'm happy with the finished piece. I can save the part and also export this part too. Finally, I'm going to move on to the night piece. To do this, I'm closing the ruck chest piece and opening the pawn piece. Once open, I'm going to re-edit the guide sketches for the night. The circle sketch needs to be 35mm and the line sketch height needs to be 55mm. Then I'm reusing the resave option and renaming the part Night Chest Piece. Sometimes it's faster to use shapes and guides you already have in place. This can speed up modelling similar part models, especially when you can just add or edit existing geometry. Editing the sub-D surface, I can now stretch the shape up to my height sketch, then widen and scale up the base of the night piece up to my circle guide. Next, I'm squishing the base loops down as I need more space above to create the horse-like head of the night piece. I can grab these points on this side of the piece, and instead of using the arrows of the robot, you can instead drag the robot from the blue segment and move it in any direction. I can also use the rotate bar of the robot to change the angle of the points like this. I'm dragging these points up to straighten the points and tighten up the angle of the neck. And then scaling down this hole and moving it. But first, I can see that the robot isn't along the XYZ axis, but you can change this. With XYZ selected, I can drag it into place. I can then play around further with the profile of the night piece. Once I'm happy, I can add some ears to the piece. Selecting this face of the top of the night, I can use a quick extrude option here and repeat to the other side. With the ears in place, I can play around further with the shape of the night based on the proportion of the ears. You can see the piece is too tall with the added extrusion, so I'm dragging down these loops to be level with my guide. Selecting the top face of an extrusion, I'm going to use the crease feature on both faces and decrease it to 50. I'm inserting an extra loop onto the top of the piece to give myself further control of the head shape of the knight. Then from the top view, I'm going to select these points and scale down the width of the head. This creates more of a nose. And with that, I'm finished with this piece. I can now save it and again export it out. Visuals of the other pieces are available in the blog if you want to create the rest of the set. The exported models that I brought into SolidWorks were used to create an animation for rendering in SolidWorks Visualize, which you can watch here. hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Thanks for watching.